I'm standing on top of Mount Ptolemy, overlooking Victoria, British Columbia. Behind me, you can see the lights of Port Angeles, part of the divided States of America. Since his election, Donald Trump has proven an extremely divisive figure, splitting the country along racial, socioeconomic, and political lines. President Twitter-in-Chief and his seemingly endless antics is our top story for 2017. Also in the news this year: Paris, Stockholm, London, Paris again, Westminster, the seemingly endless series of terrorist attacks splashed across our television screens. Elections, referendums, negotiations, resignations, and what the heck is going on with Bitcoin rounds out our top stories for 2017. Welcome to Year in Review. Donald Trump has been an endless source of news throughout the past year. So much so that if I was to cover every little thing in this broadcast, it would probably never end. So here are some of the highlights. Donald Trump was sworn in on January 20th and would promptly have his press secretary, Sean Spicer, lie about how many people had attended. Spicer would then later gain notoriety after claiming that chemical weapons were never used in World War II and would eventually be fired by Trump in July. Trump would inflame tensions across the United States when he attempted to impose a travel ban on travelers from Muslim-majority countries. The first ban was announced on January 25th and was quickly blocked by a court ruling. He would then try again in March, introducing a similar ban, which was also quickly blocked by a court ruling. Trump would then try a third time, and his travel ban that time would only partially succeed. Trump's White House has been nothing if not confusing for the actual policy makers. Oftentimes his staff having to play catch up to his Twitter feed. A perfect example of such communication breakdown was when Trump announced that transgendered people would not be allowed to serve in the US military, leaving generals scratching their heads and trying to make up policy. Trump is also the subject of an ongoing FBI investigation into whether his campaign colluded with Russia during the 2016 presidential election. Trump has run afoul of the investigation on two separate occasions. First, when he allegedly asked FBI Director James Comey to lay off the investigation, and again when he fired the FBI Director. Trump's former defense secretary, Michael Flynn, has been formally charged in the investigation, and his son is also reportedly being investigated. Legal investigations are not the only problem that Trump has to deal with. Staff turnover in the White House seems to be happening at a dizzying pace. It doesn't seem to matter if you're the chief of staff, the press secretary, or chief strategist. No one seems to be safe from Trump's wrath. And as if all the above wasn't bad enough, Trump proved that he at least has some sympathies with white supremacists after he refused to condemn violence instigated by neo-Nazis and white supremacists in Charlottesville, North Carolina. There was, of course, so much more controversy involving Trump. There was the NFL saga, there was a time he tried to censor the CDC, there was him trying to score cheap political points on Twitter, and insensitivity when dealing with the families of fallen soldiers. But I simply don't have time to cover all of it in this broadcast. So let's move on to the rest of the news of 2017. You would be forgiven if, over the course of the year, the endless series of terrorist attacks seemed to blend into one long string of violence and misery. In the UK alone, there were 5 incidents, the worst occurring when 22 people were killed in a bombing at an Ariana Grande concert in Manchester. There was also an attack in Westminster in March, on London Bridge in June, and in September, an attack on a train, again in London. On June 19th, an attack targeting the Muslim community left 1 dead and 11 injured after a vehicle plowed into worshippers. Sadly, though, the violence wasn't limited to just the UK, with attacks rocking Paris in April and February, Brussels in June, Barcelona in August, and Stockholm in April. Here in Canada, we saw 2 attacks. One in Edmonton left 5 injured, and a horrific attack on a mosque in Quebec City left 6 worshippers dead. There were more attacks. In Egypt against Coptic Christians in May, another in November when a mosque was targeted. In New York, 8 people were killed when a motorist plowed into a bike path. There were also attacks in St. Petersburg, Melbourne, Somalia, Afghanistan, and Istanbul. It's a sad reality of our modern life that these attacks are so frequent that I only have time to briefly mention them during this broadcast. North Korea was also in the news a lot this year after launching a near constant barrage of missile and nuclear tests. Over the course of the year, the North launched several missiles capable of hitting the US mainland. North Korea also made news when Kim Jong-nam, the half-brother of leader Kim Jong-un, was assassinated in Malaysia. Malaysian authorities implicated North Korea in the assassination plot, which sparked a diplomatic row between the two countries. Speaking of diplomatic rows, Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un spent most of the year trading insults and rhetoric, raising serious concerns of actual military conflict escalating on the Korean peninsula. North Korean-US relations were further degraded when US student Otto Warmbier was killed while in North Korea. Warmbier's body reportedly showed signs of torture and mistreatment. With Trump just 1 year into his presidency, it is unlikely that relations between North Korea and the United States are going to improve anytime soon. 2017 was a particularly bad year for the U.S. state of California, as they have been fighting deadly wildfires since October. More than 8,000 individual fires have raged across the state, burning more than 5,000 square kilometers. 2017 has been the most destructive wildfire season on record for the state. 2017 was also a rough hurricane season. Hurricane Irma made landfall on September 5th, devastating the Caribbean and Cuba. After destroying the Caribbean, Irma took aim at Florida, causing damage and flooding across the southern portion of the state. The year's most powerful storm would hit the same region just 2 weeks later. Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico on September 20th and completely devastated the island, destroying infrastructure and killing as many as 500 people. Another storm of note was Hurricane Harvey. It made landfall on Texas in August. Harvey was only a Category 4 storm, but extremely slow moving, meaning it caused heavy flooding throughout the state. Mexico was struck by two separate earthquakes in 2017. The first one on September 7th was a magnitude 8.2. It rattled buildings in the south of the country and left 98 people dead. Less than 2 weeks later, a second quake struck, causing even more devastation. 370 people were killed and more than 6,000 injured. Tens of thousands of people were evacuated from the Indonesian island of Bali when the Mount Agung volcano erupted. The volcano spewed ash and debris for several days, causing dozens of flights to be cancelled. India's environment made news twice in 2017. The first time in July, when floodwaters poured into the northeast of the country, leaving some 500,000 people homeless. And in Delhi, the government was forced to close thousands of schools after the city's air became too toxic to breathe. The Philippines were hammered by a typhoon which made landfall in late December. More than 200 people were killed and 70,000 people forced from their homes. And the Australian state of Queensland was pummeled by Cyclone Debbie on March 28th. The Category 4 storm caused significant damage and flooding across the state and was responsible for killing 14 people. 2017 was a big year for politics, with elections, referendums, and conflicts happening all over the world. The year kicked off with negotiations between the European Union and the UK about terms of the UK exiting the European Union, the so-called Brexit deal. It wasn't until December that the two sides finally agreed to move on to a second stage of Brexit negotiations. In April, British Prime Minister Theresa May took a gamble and called a general election, which was held in June. That gamble failed, and May now leads a minority government. The first major election of the year was held on March 15th in the Netherlands, and was seen as a litmus test for extremist right-wing parties in Europe. Going into the election, there was fear that the extremist PVV party would form government. However, the ruling People's Party managed to hang on to power. Next, France held a presidential election in April, which upset conventional French politics. The runoff race pitted extremist right-wing candidate Marine Le Pen against leftist candidate Emmanuel Macron. After a bitter campaign, Macron managed to snag the presidency, causing a collective sigh of relief to be breathed across most of Western Europe. The extremist right was again defeated in Germany when German elections were held in September. Chancellor Angela Merkel was re-elected for a fourth time. Although Merkel's party has the largest number of seats in parliament, she is leading a minority government and has found difficult times forming a coalition government. Iran also held elections in May in which the moderate president Hassan Rouhani was elected. An historic change took place in Zimbabwe after mass political demonstrations forced the President Robert Mugabe to resign. The protests started following a military takeover of state institutions after Mugabe appeared to be preparing to hand power over to his wife. Donald Trump dropped a match into the tinderbox that is the Middle East when he reversed decades of U.S. policy and declared Jerusalem the capital of Israel. The announcement was met by condemnation by most other countries and agencies around the world and caused Palestinians to declare a new intifada against Israel. The Spanish region of Catalonia declared independence after holding a controversial referendum in September. Catalonia has not been recognized by any other country, and Spain's response was to revoke Catalonia's autonomy and impose direct rule. The Iraqi region of Kurdistan held a referendum asking voters to decide if they wanted to become an independent state. The vote was overwhelmingly yes, however, independence has yet to be declared. The referendum has been opposed by both Iran and Turkey. And Saudi Arabia was in the news a lot in 2017. The first time was in June when the country led a bloc of Gulf nations on a blockade against Qatar. The Saudis claimed the blockade was because Qatar supported terrorism, although those claims were dubious at best. Saudi Arabia also made news when the Crown Prince ordered the detention of dozens of high-profile government and industry leaders. The prince says the detentions were to root out corruption, but many see it as an attempted consolidation of power in Saudi Arabia. And finally, Saudi Arabia made news when they announced that women would finally be allowed to drive in the country as part of their 2030 modernization plan. Kenya held presidential elections in August. Official results declared Uhuru Kenyatta the winner, but the opposition refused to acknowledge the victory and would eventually get those results overturned by a Kenyan court. Fresh elections were held, but the opposition boycotted them, leading to Kenyatta again being declared the winner. Just after midnight, local time, fire broke out in the Grenfell Tower apartment complex in London. The fire spread terrifyingly quickly, and before it was extinguished, more than 70 people were dead. Post-fire investigations revealed that the building, along with many others in the UK, had been built with flammable cladding to save construction costs. Mass shootings are a sad daily reality in the United States. But in 2017, there were a few that were so horrific they made international headlines. On October 1st, a gunman opened fire on a music concert in Las Vegas, killing 59 and injuring 546. Another attack took place at a church in Texas when a gunman opened fire, killing 26 and injuring 20. Thousands of Russian demonstrators protested against the government on March 26th. The demonstrators were protesting against government corruption. The authorities launched a crackdown against the protesters, arresting thousands, including the opposition leader Alexei Navalny. The fight against the Daesh terrorist group has been ongoing throughout most of the year. The Iraqi military announced that they had liberated the city of Mosul on July 21st. By the end of the year, it was reported that Daesh had been knocked out of all Iraqi territory. The Philippines has also been fighting a Daesh insurgency in the city of Marawi. That battle started on the 23rd of May and concluded in late October. Hundreds of thousands of Rohingya refugees fled persecutions in Myanmar after a military operation started in August. The operation has been called ethnic cleansing and saw Rohingya villages burned and civilians murdered and tortured. The vast majority of the refugees have fled to neighboring Bangladesh, where they're currently living in squalor. Syria's civil war saw some truly horrific scenes in 2017. In April, the government launched a chemical weapons attack which killed dozens and injured hundreds. In response to the attack, Donald Trump ordered a direct missile strike against the airbase that the attack was launched from. 2017 has been a year of reckoning of sorts for the entertainment industry after hundreds of women and men have come forward and spoken out against a culture of sexual harassment. Some of the industry's biggest stars, including Bill O'Reilly, Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, and Matt Lauer, have been implicated, and the reckoning prompted Merriam-Webster to declare feminism the 2017 word of the year. Yemen's civil war continued in 2017 with Houthi rebels fighting an insurgency against the government supported by Saudi Arabia. In December, Yemen's former president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, declared that he would be switching sides and supporting the government and Saudi Arabia. He was quickly killed by Houthi rebels. 3 people died and 75 were injured when an Amtrak train derailed in Washington state. The derailment happened on a new high-speed railway line that was being tested for the first time. It is estimated that the train was traveling more than 80 kilometers per hour faster than the speed limit for the area. And Australia became the latest country to legalize same-sex marriage after a non-binding mail-in ballot. The results saw more than 60% of respondents vote in favor of legalization. In technology news, the U.S. Federal Communications Commission effectively killed net neutrality in December when they reversed a 2015 decision that ruled which internet service providers had to provide fair treatment to all IP traffic on their networks. The concern is that under the new rules, internet service providers will be able to throttle or block access to websites and services, and that consumers will end up paying more per month. Cybersecurity made news a lot in 2017 after several high-profile hacks made the media. The first one happened in May when some ransomware dubbed WannaCry hit more than 200,000 workstations around the world. One of the worst hit agencies was Britain's National Health Service, which actually saw several hospitals shut down services during the attack. In June, a similar attack was focused on Ukrainian government and business systems, but managed to spread to other countries. And in September, Equifax, a company responsible for credit monitoring, announced that a security breach meant that the personal information of more than 200 million people around the world had been leaked. Several of those attacks relied on vulnerabilities that were uncovered and exploited by the CIA and later released to the public by the website WikiLeaks. And finally, NASA's Cassini spacecraft was retired after nearly 20 years in active service. The spacecraft was instrumental in our understanding of the planet Saturn. He was one of the most despicable human beings in modern history, and on November 19th, we learned that mass murderer Charles Manson had died. Manson gained infamy in the 1960s when he brainwashed a cult into murdering people on his behalf, which he believed would start a race war. We lost a number of other notable people in 2017, including Tom Petty, Fats Domino, Gord Downie, Roger Moore, Fox News founder Roger Ailes, and Chinese activist Li Xiaobo. And those were the stories that made headlines around the world in 2017. From all of us at iNet, thanks for watching, Happy New Year, and we hope to see you here again in 2018.